I stayed. I loved my husband. And somehow, that was the thing that almost destroyed me. We had been married for 43 years when he sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where we had eaten 10,000 dinners, where our daughter had done her homework, where I had paid the bills every month for 4 decades, and told me he wanted a divorce. I was 67 years old. He was 71. I didn't cry right away. I remember that clearly. I just sat there and looked at his hands, the hands I had held at our wedding, and I thought, I don't recognize those hands anymore. I don't know what they've been doing. His name was my husband. That's how I'll call him here. Because the man who sat across from me that afternoon in our kitchen in Asheville was not the man I had known, and I don't want to give that man the dignity of a name in my story. I found out later, much later, in a way that will make your stomach turn, that he had been planning this for nearly 2 years. 2 years. While I was cooking dinner and driving to my sister's house on Sundays and pruning the rose bushes along the back fence, he had been meeting with an attorney. While I was sitting beside him at our granddaughter's birthday party, while I was holding his hand during his knee surgery recovery, while I was, God help me, renewing our wedding vows in Savannah for our 40th anniversary, he had been building a wall around every asset we owned. And I had no idea. Let me tell you something about our marriage that I think matters. I was not naive. I had a degree in accounting. I had worked for 22 years as a bookkeeper for a commercial real estate firm before I retired at 62 to help care for my mother. I understood money. I understood paperwork. I understood the difference between a deed and a title and a lien. What I did not understand was that a person could look you in the eyes across a breakfast table every morning for 4 decades and be lying to you the entire time. Our assets were not small. Over the course of our marriage, my husband had built a residential construction company that, by the time he retired, was worth somewhere in the range of $3 million. We also owned our home in Asheville, a house I had chosen, designed the interior of, planted every inch of the garden around, valued at approximately $900,000. We had retirement accounts jointly held. We had a rental property in Brevard that had been in my family originally, transferred into both our names after my father passed. I say we just because I believed I was wrong. When my husband slid the papers across the kitchen table and asked me to see an attorney, he was calm. He was almost gentle about it. He said we had grown apart. He said he hadn't been happy for a long time. He said he hoped we could handle this like adults. I asked him if there was someone else. He said no. I found out later there was. That first wet week I was in a fog. I called my sister. She lives about 40 minutes away, out past Weaverville, and she has been my closest person in the world since we were children. And I sat in her kitchen and I could not stop shaking, not crying, just shaking. Like my body understood something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. She asked me if I had looked at our accounts. I hadn't. I assumed they were where they had always been. I went home and I looked. The construction company, the business my husband had built over 30 years, using connections I had helped him maintain, contracts I had helped him organize in the early days when we were working out of our spare bedroom, had been restructured. 18 months earlier, it had been transferred into a limited liability company, a separate legal entity. His name only. The business I had watched him build from nothing, that I had helped him build, was no longer a marital asset. It had been moved. The rental property in Brevard, the one that had come from my family, had been refinanced. There was now a lien against it for an amount that nearly matched its value. I sat at the kitchen table, alone this time, and I read through the documents I found in his filing cabinet. The filing cabinet I had never felt the need to search before. Because I trusted him. I called my sister back and I said, I need a different attorney than the one I've been thinking of calling. She asked me what I meant. I said, I need someone who deals with financial misconduct. Not just divorce. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'll make some calls. The attorney I found. I'll call her my attorney, because she deserves every ounce of credit in this story, and none of the attention my husband might try to bring her way. Was a woman out of Charlotte who had spent 25 years handling high-asset divorce cases involving business fraud. She had a voice like river water, smooth and steady and moving fast underneath. She looked at everything I brought her, the company restructuring documents, the refinancing papers, the filing dates. She looked at all of it, and then she looked at me and said, "Do you know what he did?" I said, "I think I'm beginning to." She said, "He transferred the business assets before he filed. He was trying to strip them out of the marital estate before you had any legal claim to them." I said, "Can he do that?" She said, "He tried. The question is whether he did it successfully, and my job is to prove he didn't." There were a few things working in my favor that my attorney identified quickly. First, the timeline. The LLC restructuring had happened 18 months before he filed for divorce, but my attorney found documentation, emails, primarily, and one very unfortunate text message that had been backed up to a shared cloud account my husband had forgotten I had access to, showing that he had been consulting with his own attorney about divorce proceedings nearly 2.5 years before he filed. The transfers had happened during that consultation period. That matters legally. It meant the transfers weren't just a business decision. They were made in anticipation of divorce, with the intent to deprive me of my share. Second, the rental property. My attorney pulled the original deed. The property had been transferred into joint marital ownership after my father's estate was settled. It was, under North Carolina law, a marital asset. The lien my husband had placed against it, using it as collateral for a loan he had taken out in his name only, was something she believed we could challenge. Third, and this is the part that still makes me feel cold when I think about it, my husband's own records were not clean. He was a man who kept everything: files, receipts, ledgers going back to the early years of the business. He had given me access to those files years ago because I used to help him prepare for tax season. He had forgotten to revoke that access when he had the business restructured. My attorney's paralegal went through those records for 3 weeks. What they found was a pattern of asset movement that told a very specific story. My husband had been systematically converting business assets into personal assets. Equipment sold at below market value to a holding company, owned by a man I later learned was the brother of the woman he was seeing over the course of 14 months. The money from those sales had moved into an account I had never seen, at a bank we had never used together. He had been hiding money, in plain sight more or less, for over a year. My attorney said to me in our 3rd meeting, "This is not a simple divorce. This is financial fraud against a marital partner. Those are 2 different legal conversations, and we're going to have both of them. I want to be honest about what those months were like. I would be lying if I said I was strong every day. I was not. There were mornings when I lay in bed in the guest room. I had moved into the guest room 2 weeks after that kitchen table conversations because I could not sleep beside him. I simply could not. And I stared at the ceiling and thought about 43 years and what they meant, and whether any of it had been real. I thought about our daughter. She is 40 years old now, married, lives out in Denver. When I called to tell her what was happening, not all of it at first, just that we were divorcing, she was quiet for a long time. Then she asked me what I had done. I said, "What do you mean? What did I do?" She said, "Dad says you've been difficult for years. He says you've been controlling the money." I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of the grocery store when she said this to me. I remember the exact spot. I remember the cart return about 20 feet to my left. I remember not being able to speak for what felt like a full minute. My own daughter, who I had raised, who I had driven to dance recitals and sat up with when she had panic attacks in high school and flown out to Denver twice a year every year for the last decade. She had already chosen sides, and she had chosen wrong. I won't pretend that didn't break something in me. It did. I think it broke something I have not been able to fully repair, even now. Children are supposed to be yours in a way that nothing else is. That's what you believe. Anyway, all those years of raising them. You believe that whatever happens, whatever falls apart, they will know you. They will see you clearly. She didn't see me clearly. She saw the story her father had spent 2 years building. I called my sister that night, and she came over and we sat on the back porch, and she held my hand and didn't say anything for a long time. Eventually, she said, You know the truth. Stay in the truth. I stayed in the truth. My attorney filed. We contested the LLC restructuring as a fraudulent transfer made in anticipation of divorce proceedings. We filed a motion challenging the lien on the Brevard property. We submitted the financial records her paralegal had compiled, including the asset movement documentation and the bank account records, as evidence of dissipation of marital assets. My husband's attorney, a man who apparently did not anticipate that I had found any of this, sent a letter to my attorney saying that my claims were without merit and that they looked forward to presenting the facts. My attorney read me that letter over the phone. Then she said, "Good. Let them present the facts." There was a mediation first, which I won't spend too much time on, because it was essentially 3 hours of my husband's attorney making arguments that my attorney took apart piece by piece. My husband sat across the table from me for the first time since I had moved into the guest room, and I looked at him. This man I had known since I was 24 years old. This man whose children I had carried, whose parents I had helped care for when they were dying, whose business I had helped build in a spare bedroom in our first apartment. And I felt almost nothing. Not anger, not grief. Something more like the feeling you get when you realize a window in your house has been painted shut for so long you forgot it was supposed to open. We did not reach an agreement in mediation. We went to a judge. My attorney was thorough in a way I had never seen a person be thorough before. She had a timeline prepared that documented every asset transfer, cross-referenced against the dates it's in the communications she had recovered. She had an expert witness, a forensic accountant, who walked through the business records and explained, in terms that I imagine were difficult for my husband to sit through, exactly what the pattern of transactions indicated. The judge asked my husband's attorney several questions during that presentation. None of them seemed comfortable to answer. The LLC transfer was deemed a fraudulent conveyance. Under North Carolina law, a transfer made with the intent to defraud a spouse of their equitable distribution rights is subject to reversal. The business assets were returned to the marital estate for the purpose of division. The Brevard property lien was challenged on the grounds that my husband had used a jointly held marital asset as collateral for a personal loan without my knowledge or consent. The court ordered the lien addressed as part of the overall asset division. The separate bank account, the one with the money from the equipment sales, was also brought into the estate. I did not get everything. That is important to say. Equitable distribution does not mean equal, and the judge had discretion. But I received a settlement that my attorney described as fair, given the circumstances. The house in Asheville was sold, and I received a substantial share of the proceeds. A portion of the retirement accounts was transferred to me. I received a financial settlement from the marital share of the business valuation. It was enough. It was more than enough to start over. I bought a small house about 20 minutes outside of Asheville, closer to my sister, in a neighborhood with old trees and neighbors who wave from their porches. It is one story. My knees are not what they used to be, and it has a yard just big enough for the raised beds I've always wanted to put in but never could in the old house because my husband didn't want the backyard dug up. I dug it up. I put in 6 raised beds. I am growing tomatoes and beans and more basil than any one person needs. My daughter and I did not speak for nearly a year after the proceedings ended. It was she who called first. She was crying. She said she had spoken with the family attorney in Denver, a friend of her husband's who had looked over the case documents. I don't know why she had done that. Perhaps she was looking for evidence that I had been wrong, and that he had explained to her what a fraudulent conveyance was and what the forensic accounting had found and what it meant. She said, "Mom, I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't." She said, "I should have listened to you." I said, "Yes, you should have. I don't tell this part of the story to make my daughter look bad. I tell it because I think it's the truest part of what happened to me, and I think a lot of women in situations like mine will recognize it. The loneliness of watching someone you raised choose the story over the truth, and then the strange, complicated grace of watching them find their way back. We are in contact now. It is not what it was, and I'm not certain it will ever be exactly what it was. but she calls me on Sundays. She asks about the garden. Last spring, she flew out and we spent a weekend together, and she helped me build a trellis for the beans. We didn't talk about her father much. There wasn't really anything left to say. Her father died. This is the part that is hardest to explain, not because it is complicated, but because it is not complicated at all, and somehow that is its own kind of weight. He died 14 months after the settlement was finalized. He had been having problems for a few years. I had gone with him to the cardiologist twice during our marriage, and apparently it had gotten worse after the stress of the proceedings. His brother called to tell me. I had not heard from anyone in my husband's family since the mediation. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after that call. I did not cry. I thought about the man I had married at 24 in a church in Hendersonville, with my mother crying in the front row and my sister beside me. I thought about the night our daughter was born and how he had held her and wept in a way I had never seen him cry before or after. I thought about the early years in the apartment with the spare bedroom we used as an office, building something from nothing, both of us. I thought about all of that, and then I thought about the kitchen table and the papers he slid across it and the 2 years of planning I had known nothing about. I went to the memorial service. My attorney, when I told her I was thinking of going, was quiet for a moment and then said, "That's your decision to make, but go for yourself, not for him." I went for myself. I sat in the back. I watched the people who had been his world stand up and say the things people say. His brother spoke, a few of his old employees. The woman, I knew who she was by then, sat in the third row and did not look back. My daughter saw me when she was walking out. She stopped and looked at me for a moment, and then she came and sat beside me and took my hand. We didn't say anything. We just sat there in that half-empty room until the last person had filed out. Then we went and got coffee at a diner 2 blocks away and sat across from each other in a vinyl booth, and she said, "How are you really?" I said, "I think I'm okay. I think I actually might be okay." And I meant it. I am 69 years old. I have my raised beds and my sister 20 minutes away and Sunday phone calls from my daughter. I have a house with 1 story and old trees and neighbors who wave. I have the knowledge that when something was taken from me, not just money, not just property, but time and trust, and the story I thought my life was, I did not let it be the end of my story. I found an attorney who knew what fraud looked like. I learned what a fraudulent conveyance was. I sat in a courtroom and I let the truth be spoken out loud, in public, in front of a judge who listened. There is something I want to say to anyone listening who is in the middle of what I was in the middle of, who is sitting at their own kitchen table, staring at papers they don't understand, who has just heard their own child say something that felt like a door closing. The truth does not stop being the truth because someone has built a careful story around it. The wall they build around the truth is not the truth. It is just a wall. And walls can come down. I planted tomatoes this spring in the beds I dug myself. They are doing extraordinarily well. I tend them in the morning, when the light comes in low across the yard, and sometimes I stay out there longer than I need to. Just standing in the garden I finally got to have, listening to it grow,